the World Bank estimates that about 2 billion tons of waste is generated throughout the globe each and every year. Waste that has piled up to such an extent that we barely even have any more space to place it within. However, the issues related to excess waste generation are unfortunately not exclusive to the spatial element. In fact, far from it. Over the years, with the expansion of technology and mass manufacturing, has come a rapid rise in different forms of wastes that are known to be of a highly hazardous nature, not only for the Earth's general ecosystem, but also for the health of the people that live in general proximity to said waste. Luckily, however, this rapid waste production phenomena has coincided with the equally rapid rise of environmental and green lobbies that have, over the past decades, successfully pressured governments into taking measures to not only reduce waste generation, but perhaps more significantly, to assure that any hazardous waste stemming from dangerous chemicals or materials are disposed of in a safe and proper manner. But, despite these encouraging developments, new waste-related laws and regulations have unfortunately led to the meteoric rise of a new form of environmental crime that, with no exaggeration, poses a gargantuan threat to the future sustainability of waste disposal. The term contraband trafficking is probably mostly synonymous with the movement of products such as recreational substances, weapons, or even humans. But traffic contraband does not necessarily always relate to objects that people desire to possess, as it may sometimes relate to something that people may wish to see themselves rid of, both cheaply and discreetly. Namely, something like waste, or more precisely, hazardous waste. Illicit waste trafficking refers to the process of illegally trading, transporting, processing, or disposing of any type of waste product, and is one of the fastest growing and most profitable criminal ventures that has risen to concerning prominence over the years. Now, at face value, this crime may not necessarily seem to be such a problem, probably due to the absence of any obvious victims. But it must be recognized that waste trafficking is far from a victimless crime. This is because of, as we already mentioned, the different types of waste that bear the potential to be highly detrimental to both ecology and human health. For example, a common practice in waste trafficking is to illegally recycle waste high in dangerous heavy metals such as chrome, nickel, or lead, all known contributors to issues such as cancer and kidney disease, and in turn turning said waste into fertilizer that is in turn falsely sold back to farmers and distributed on crops that are either consumed by humans or by animals that are turned into humanly consumed meat. And thus, unsurprisingly, the crimes gaining traction has inspired a series of organized crime groups, in turn nicknamed by many as the eco-mafia, to get in on the lucrative endeavor, especially in Italy, and with even notorious organizations such as Andreatta and Camorra assumed to be involved in the trade. The escalated sophistication of the crime presents the worrying threat of icing out legal waste disposal companies that are unable to compete with waste traffickers who need not worry about the intrinsic cost of safely handling waste. This means that if legal waste disposal isn't to be disincentivized to a devastating effect, the relevant law enforcement authorities must take swift and efficient action. Whilst each individual country has its own laws relating to the crime, due to the transnational nature of the offense, where traditionally waste generated within developed nations is illegally dumped into the land of developing nations, the Basel Convention has been founded as a primary convention for combating waste trafficking on an international scale. But, to properly counter the crime, it is vital to understand the process behind it and what it is exactly that makes it tick. Generally speaking, waste tends to be categorized into two highly broad categories. Domestic waste, which refers to the common waste produced by normal citizens, and special waste, referring to waste produced by companies, sometimes hazardous in nature. And thus, it is naturally the latter type of waste that is most susceptible to trafficking. Contrary to what some people may expect, the waste disposal process is a very vast one, involving the waste creation, collection, storage, treatment, transport, and disposal or reuse. This means that waste often passes through the possession of a wide range of intermediaries in between its production and removal, each of which prospective candidates for said waste's illicit trafficking in whichever relevant part of the waste supply chain. For example, a prominent waste trafficking case, discovered in the Friuli-Venezia Giulia region of Italy, saw mostly unaware and innocent waste creators paying a waste disposal agency money to store, treat, transport, and dispose of their mostly paper and plastic waste as necessary, but that instead faked and forged waste treatment documents, intentionally mislabeling the nature of their waste to the relevant authorities, until they then trafficked said waste from Italy to China, and then Syria, where the rubbish was in turn illegally disposed of, or reused and resold, at a profitable and dishonest price. But, whilst this case is part of a common trend where special waste producers, usually businesses and corporations, are not directly involved in the waste trafficking process, this certainly does not mean that waste producing firms are free of any blame for said crime's growth. This is because, whilst a series of companies may not explicitly be involved in the illicit waste trade, they are nonetheless, oftentimes, tacitly at fault for issues due to their neglect, sometimes intentional, of performing the necessary due diligence checks regarding who they're entrusting their waste to, in favor of simply pursuing the cheapest option. A very prominent example of this phenomenon in practice was the Trafigura waste disposal scandal, where Trafigura, one of the world's largest commodity trading companies, produced a large amount of hazardous waste made up of dangerous substances such as naphtha and caustic soda that was originally entrusted to the Amsterdam Port Service, or APS for short, which in turn provided an understandably pricey quotation for said waste handling, thus prompting Trafigura to instead employ the services of a less reputable company at a suspiciously cheaper price, and that on finding out about the hazardous nature of the waste, illegally dumped the untreated waste into multiple sites within Abidjan, the most populous city in Ivory Coast, with the effect of, according to some estimates, dozens of deaths and over 100,000 hospitalizations. And this is only scratching the surface of the nature of the ever-growing trade that is growing more complex and intricate with time. But luckily, in recent years, the crime's growth has also coincided with developments of better strategies for combating it, with a series of initiatives such as, for example, the EU Waste Shipment Regulation, founded with the intention of building upon the Basel Convention. Additionally, as the modus operandi of waste traffickers has become better understood by law enforcement authorities, they are in turn rendered better able to tackle the problem by advancing their investigative techniques and educating customs officers, police, regulators, and so on to better recognize potential issues in this regard, and in turn to report said suspicions to the relevant authorities. And in recent years, these measures have in fact shown some signs of success, as evident from an increase in successful prosecutions related to waste trafficking. Prosecutions that have significantly resulted in lengthy prison sentences for assailants. A development that seems to highlight the changing attitude of the courts towards the crime, which previously fell firmly under the category of high reward and low risk. But despite these positive developments, critics nonetheless claim that the measures implemented by wealthy waste-producing nations are simply said not sufficient enough to counter illicit waste trafficking on a mass level. Some would even say, intentionally so. An often overlooked aspect of waste trafficking is that waste, produced by wealthier, often past colonizer nations, is in turn usually dumped in poorer, former colonies, through many of the same trade routes that were used during colonial periods. A phenomenon that has led many skeptics to proclaim that the waste trafficking trade is in actuality just another aspect of neocolonialism, something they call waste colonialism, where wealthy nations continue to exploit poorer ones, just as they did during colonial periods, but this time through more indirect means. The fact of the matter is that even if special waste is properly treated, some forms are nonetheless bound to retain some sort of hazardous properties. And thus, the benefit of this waste eventually finding its way into former colonies is a very obvious one. Whether that be to prevent health scares in countries of origin, or for the political benefits of reducing internal waste in countries where green politics is especially prominent, this overt benefit offers quite a believable explanation for why, despite recent escalated action for impeding waste trafficking, such measures pale in comparison to something like drug trafficking, which is overwhelmingly the focus of most developed nations. This is of course not to say that rich countries are actively conspiring with criminals to dump their waste in Africa and Asia, but instead to highlight potential conflicts of interest when it comes to cracking down on the crime, as is necessary not only to preserve the environment of poorer countries, but also to help protect richer countries from the profound consequences of ecological disaster that is a known contributor to state unrest and failures. That's consequences in a globalized world are bound to negatively affect even developed countries in a series of manners, such as the disruption of trade routes, mass displacements of prospective asylum seekers, rises of extremism and terrorism, the increased necessity of state aid, and more. This is not to say that all forms of waste trafficking are exclusively the fault or responsibility of only waste producer nations, as governments of waste destination countries must also bear some responsibility over failures in their laws and institutions due to issues such as corruption that have contributed to waste being dumped on their shores. Instead, it should mean that all concerned parties, rich or poor, must understand the importance of safeguarding our shared planet, if nothing else, for the long-term interest of literally anybody who lives on this planet, and that simply cannot afford to see it turned into a toxic waste mine. Thanks everybody for listening to my video essay. It's something that I'm very passionate about. Waste trafficking is really something that interests me. And if you enjoyed listening to it, I'd really appreciate it if you can subscribe and like the video and comment, give me any feedback. What do you think? What should we do? Did I leave anything out? Whatever. So yeah, thanks for watching everybody.